So a quick show of hands here. How long have you been working with Pure? Less than 1 year? Less than 2 years? Less than 5? Okay, so we have some old hands here. That's always good. If they look happy during this presentation, that's a good sign. If they don't look unhappy, but so this presentation here was really an opportunity to speak to new Pure admins and to speak to people who have the perhaps enormous task of dealing with data in Pure. And so there's a whole host of different tooling that we provide. There's different functionality, there's different jobs, there's different ideas and processes that you can use within Pure, but it helps to know about them first. So the first part of it really is the mindsets and the tools discussion. So, you have to think to yourself as a new Pure admin, why are we collecting this data? And then the second question is, how should we collect this data, or how should we process this data? And back in I think it was 1996, when the CRISs became more popular, this was the original list. This is the original purposes of what a CRIS should be able to support. Identify potential funding. I won't go through all of them, but there's about 21 of them. And the important part for you to think about is, how does a CRIS support my purpose? So it doesn't need to support every one of those, but the ones that are important to you. And that is a very important thing to think about when you're collecting data and how you're processing data. So to give you an example, organization data. Are you part of a community Pure? Are there multiple versions of organizations that you work together with? When you come to your users, are they part of the ref? Are they part of another assessment? Because that's a whole other consideration in terms of data collection, but also data processing and management. And lastly, where do you get your data from? Your research outputs. Do you get it from Scopus? Do you get it from Web of Science, from PubMed, from Dimensions? Because these are all very important issues that you need to figure out, because each has its own characteristics, the import source. So you really need to think about, what is the purpose that I'm collecting this data? What are the different contexts that I operate in, not only as a Pure admin, but my institution and my region or my country even. And if you think about the very simplified tree, so the more Pure conferences you come to, the more often you'll see this slide. So this is the tree of our value proposition, so to speak. So at the bottom of the tree is about collecting your data. It's about optimizing your processes. It's about managing data quality. And then eventually the fruits appear, and that's about telling your research stories. And that's about growing collaborations. So that covers quite a lot of the scope of what a CRIS should be able to do. But when it comes to you as a Pure admin, you have to remember this famous saying. So, blessed are those who plant trees under whose shade they will never sit. There's a lot of work that goes into this that you may never see the benefit of, but for sure your institution and your users will in the future. So bringing back the simplified view of Pure. For us, the planting happens when you collect your data and optimize your processes and manage your data quality. So these are the three most important steps for me, at least, in the data models team, in about managing your data, cleaning it up, processing it, making it fit for your stakeholders, and so on. So I'm going to start with the first one. That's the data collection. So we have access to, or where institutions have said that they would like to share basic statistics about their Pure. We get a feedback from, I think it's over 250 different institutions tell us like how many research output they have in their system. So to give you an idea, this is a sample. It's not necessarily everybody here, but to give you an idea of the number of different content types and their distributions in Pure. So this may be surprising to you, but it is definitely worth remembering that the sheer volume of data is not necessarily what you think it is. So for example, the most extensive one is external persons. You may think it's external organizations, but it's actually external persons. And then it's research outputs, and then external organizations. So if you think about the cleaning of the content that you need to do to suit your purpose or the scope of your job, is you need to figure out what opportunities are there for me to process these individual content types. So there's some various best practices when it comes to data in. So you really need to think about, how does data come in? So I think it was a year and a half ago, there was a survey out to all the Pure admins. Like, what do you think about data quality? Like, where does bad data come in? And we talked about how content comes in on a general, in a general sense. That could be a manual creation of content. It could be input from source by the user, or it could be imported by the admin. They import candidates based on Scopus IDs or ORCID IDs. There's synchronizations, there's bulk imports, there's import from file. So there's a lot of opportunities for data to come into Pure, but even more opportunities for bad data to come in. So you'll be happy, sad to know that in the survey, let's call it the route that produced the worst data was the import from source by users. So not manually created content, but when users were importing from Scopus, from Web of Science, and you'll remember that there's a matching screen just after they import the content, and users don't have time to review every single affiliation. They don't have time to check that this is the right organization that's been added here. And with the new funding section, for example, that complicates matters a bit more as well, because they've been asked to check a bit more data. So you have to be aware that your users are going to produce bad data for you. And some teams, some Pure institutions have huge Pure teams, like 10 to 20, 30 people just working on Pure. Some people have one person. So it's important to remember the context that you work in, and you need to figure out how often are my users bringing content in? Can I not trust is the wrong word, but can I be confident that my users are following the directions that they should be doing? And there's a whole lot of supporting frameworks that either you already have in place or you need to think about setting in place. The first one is, what are your institutional requirements for capturing data? Like how has your head of department said if we're going to be evaluated, all my researchers need to bring their content into Pure so that I can get a report on this. You need to think about, what are the import sources you're using? If I'm using PubMed only as an import source, I would be quite scared of the data quality. But that's why we have different functionality to support lower quality import sources. What are some of the common identifiers? Do all of your researchers have an ORCID ID? Do all of them have a Scopus ID where relevant? But ORCID ID we're seeing as the much more common identifier. But we know that researchers, okay, is Milena here? Yes. So we know, we're talking to Milena's husband, Christian, who's a professor, and he says that if I forget my ORCID, I just create a new one. Yeah. Yeah, sorry, Christian's not here. He has 7 different ORCIDs. And so this is, I'm glad that our colleague from ORCID is here, so he can help us with that. But the idea is, you need to remember that these identifiers they're not on your national identifiers. They're not stored in your phone that you can reference at any time. These are just ad hoc generated identifiers at times, which is terrible for data quality. Another aspect that you should think about is the data preparation. So thinking about content that you bring in via sync, for example, it needs to be updated, it needs to be correct. Otherwise, you're just importing bad data and you're using that bad data further in Pure. Perhaps more practically speaking, in a pragmatic sense, the training for your users. What does your user manual look like for when you're adding content to Pure? We provide a lot of collateral in terms of screenshots, in terms of processes, and we're getting better at doing it. Esther, who's in the room with us, is also really working towards making sure documentation makes sense. And this is not only documentation that people can access within Pure, but that you as Pure admins can use to help your users. And support for users. That's always a big question, depending on how big the Pure team is. How can I help my users? If I have an issue with journal metrics, a researcher says this is not correct, or why is my H index there instead of my Google index? These types of questions are important as well. And you have to have a team that can answer these questions, and of course, perhaps for me, the most important is you need to communicate the value of this to your users. If they put in bad data, they will be evaluated incorrectly or unfairly. It's almost like you need to hammer this home. It's like, I know this is hard work, this is crap work, but you need to make sure that your data is correct. Otherwise, you will not get that promotion, maybe. or you will not get that funding, maybe. So I'm not saying take an alarmist perspective, but you need to remind your users in your training that it's extremely important that the data is correct. So moving on to data quality, this is where we start to help you a bit more. So you know the 5 C's of data quality, so complete, correct, connected, current, and compliant. Each of these deals with not only is how content brought in, like are all the fields filled out? Is it compliant with my funder, with my institutional requirements? Is it connected to their data set that's also relevant? And we asked this during the survey as well. What's the most important part of the 5 C's to your institution? And you notice that compliant was by far the most important data quality element. So if I can make sure that my data is compliant, then I'm satisfying a lot of the needs of my users, but also of my stakeholders, my senior management, and so on. So it's a question for you that you need to think about. What is the most important C of the 5 C's for my institution? And we do a lot to be able to support this. The automated support functionality in the cron jobs. We have available updates that can take content from PubMed and over time improve it if you have access to Scopus or Web of Science, because we know why people like using PubMed, because it's often the first input source to get that record, but it's not the best quality. There's different match import source IDs for publications. So if you provide a DOI, it'll search. If you have Scopus or Web of Science, it'll search in that service to fetch other data for you. You can merge duplicate journals. You can clean Scopus journals. There's person maintenance jobs. So there's a whole raft of different jobs that will help you as an admin, not only clean the data itself, but remind users. So for example, the Sherpa Romeo synchronization provides Sherpa like APC data, but that APC data is also shown on the import screens and creation screens to your users. There's different match opportunities for person identifiers in Scopus. There's an external organization synchronization with SciVal, so you get a standardized list of orgs. So there's a whole lot of functionality in Pure that can help you keep your data clean at least. There's also some manual interventions that we've introduced, so like a little UI nudge to your users. So for example, the institutional information that you can configure as a Pure admin saying, if you have questions, go to this, you can go to this resource, or these are the institution's requirements for open access. And same with Sherpa Romeo, you can actually get, if I want to set something as open access so that's available directly on the portal, the little Sherpa Romeo recommendation will tell you immediately what version of that record can be set as open access so that it's immediately available in the portal. There's different journal-specific information that you can get, but if you want to really encourage open access, there's a reminder that you can configure for your users saying, don't forget to add this version of the record so that we have an open access version of the record. And on data sets, there's an open air compliance check saying, are all of these fields present on the record? If not, there's a little warning label there. So the researcher knows that they need to add this information such that it's compliant with open air. When it comes to deduplication, you see that we have the new data quality interface, and we're tackling external organizations and journals, and we're bringing in research output there as well. Admittedly, these are only for your editors and senior users, or sorry, elevated users, but more content types are added all the time, will be added all the time. So one of the last parts of this approach here is how to optimize your data processes. This is a very generic, more of a motivational speech really than specific pragmatic advice. So there's going to be a very strong learning curve here. So learning through experience. So as you move through Pure, you need to keep on thinking back, like, are my workflows working for me? Because you can have workflows on research output. You can set revalidation. And every time that happens, do we have enough people to revalidate content? Am I confident enough in my researchers adding the correct data where I don't need revalidation for certain content types? And it's an opportunity also to audit how quickly your users create content. If I'm one person and my university is creating 10,000 research publications a year, that's a problem. But it also, some of the data that if I'm producing reports for senior management, are they seeing that there are faults in the data? Like, am I collaborating with myself as an external organization? So these kind of problems, of course, are triggers for you to figure out what specific content types you need to work on. But it's worth taking that sort of mental refresh every once in a while, saying, am I focusing on the right process? And it's always good to reevaluate your 5Cs priorities. If you're compliant, if you're satisfied with your compliance, if you see your researchers are reacting to your open access reminders, that's a great thing. Then you can focus on the completeness of a record or the connectedness, and you'll get more value out of reporting in that way, for example. So the question is, like, do you want your process to be it's an uphill process, but at least it's a nice, comfortable walk up the mountain? Or do you want to be, well, maybe I'm a climber. Do you want to be climbing these extremely difficult routes, trying to get your data quality under control? So it's up to you. I mean, as I said, this is really just more advice. But everybody here, from the more senior pure admins, they've gone through this before as well. It's always worth talking to other institutions, like, how do I manage like the research output duplicates or something like that? How do I get my users to do this? Do you have any training material that I can borrow for my users? You'll see that the group is fairly open. And you can also just Google. Monash, for example, has great instructional steps for their users and how to add content. So, and of course, Melena and I are here, and Esther is here in terms of documentation. So we're always here to help you help your users. So that's my last slide. Thank you very much. And I hopefully this helped. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask me here or during lunch and so on.
So I just want to mention Data Matters. We do have a blog post on Data Matters with an entire list of a lot of university help pages on how to help your researchers. I think there's about 30 different university help pages there. Questions? Yeah.
Armand, yes.
I'm very glad with this presentation. I am a more than 5-year user. Yeah. But there's a lot to improve. And I think one of the things that what you made me think of is that, data quality requires a lot of time and resources. And I think what would be useful if you know sort of how much time would you need and FTEs to manage this data, and what do you prioritize? I mean, if you don't prioritize, what are the consequences of not prioritizing it? So I think there's a lot more to investigate here.
Yeah, so there's definitely opportunity costs here. So the more time that you spend cleaning on content, the less time you have validating content or helping your users. But there's one success story that I heard about yesterday. So Hannah Voog from University of Lund. She's in the room. Yes. So at the reception last night, we were talking about external organization data, and she mentioned that they've managed to keep it down to an acceptable level where even if new publications come in with unknown organizations, it's not it's not a huge amount of work, but there was a lot of work that went into it in the beginning. So if you can get to that stable state, then the peak of the work is always at the beginning, that first initial clean, but that's also the most hair-tearing part of it as well. But once you get down to a level,
maybe you should have these levels, sort of, name the levels.
Yeah.
Where am I as an institution in data quality?
Yeah.
That would be very useful.
Yes.
Then you can tell your manager, I need more people. Yeah. Because I am at level 5, I should be at level 1.
Yeah. But this is also where the 5Cs comes in. So for me, as an institution, I need to figure out, is it more important that my record is complete than it is correct, or that it's connected to other content? Because your stakeholders have different needs. So if they're, so I think you kind of have to figure it out. So this is part of the data quality dashboard that we're looking at. It's where you set your parameters saying, I'm more interested in completeness than compliance. Then your metric will change as well, saying only 80% of your records have all the fields filled out. So then you can work towards that. You can send reminders to users saying, please fill out the editor, fill out the record. So it's really you as an institution and you as your stakeholders that decide what is important to you as an institution. No, it's in development, but it's a long-term process.
Yeah, thank you. I'm from Aarhus University, and I'm one of the new admins with the 4 months, something like that. And I'm at the early stage of cleaning up external organizations, and I'm finding it horrendous work and very, very important. And everybody I ask, they are either doing or planning to do the same thing. And I can't help thinking this should not be done at a individual institutional level. So I would encourage Elsevier and the user groups to do this together. And I know there are institution-specific criteria, but in the Danish user group, I can't help thinking we should do this one time, have a curated list of organizations, and yes, there will be compromises, but we could reduce the workload so
enormously.
much.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely correct. So some of our community customers as well, we do that exactly. So behind the scenes in Pure, and specifically only for community customers, is a whole raft of automated cleaning jobs. But the problem is that these are very brutal jobs. These are jobs with no mercy when it comes to removing duplicates. And that's a problem because it's a destructive process. You will not get that data back. So we only do it in exceptional circumstances. But when it comes to like a common reference list of organizations, yes, that's very popular. But we always encourage people to use the Cyvel organization list, the synchronization there. It's not the perfect by any means, but it's definitely better than a very messy external org list. Yeah. But so the Danish user group is interested, the Dutch user group is interested in it, UK user group is also interested in a common reference list. But when we talk about practicalities, like who would like to share their data, it becomes a bit more tricky. You'd be surprised to find.